Thank you folks for joining us. Attendees are still pouring in. I want to say hello and welcome. I'm Lila Zayed, Pump Spotting Senior Director of Strategy and Sales. We are so glad that you're with us today to hear from this very smart panel of HR and mental health experts as we chat about a very important and very timely topic: isolation, working parents, and the Great Resignation. The working conditions of the pandemic, whether they're on site, remote, hybrid, have accelerated isolation and mental health concerns among our workforces, especially working caregivers. Today, we'll zero in on working parents and the impact of that isolation and the stress it brings on employee productivity, absenteeism, retention. As we were preparing for today's session, we've heard from a great number of you that you're here today because you're looking for ways to strengthen your organizations. You want to remove the barriers faced by your workforces, and we are going to help you do just that. Before we begin, here are a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be recorded and shared with everyone who registered, so be on the lookout for that email tomorrow. While all participants will be muted throughout the session, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to interact with the group. Toward the end of today's discussion, our panelists will be answering participant questions. We invite you to ask those questions as they arise using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And lastly, your input will help guide today's webinar, so be on the lookout for polls during our time together. And here comes your first poll. Given the topic of today's webinar, isolation, working parents, and the Great Resignation, what do you think your greatest opportunities are at your organization? Go ahead and make your selection now. Is it high turnover, talent attraction, something else? All right, while you're working on that, let me introduce to you the founder and CEO of Pump Spotting and our host and facilitator today. She's pitched on the moving escalator of Apple's reality show, Planet of the Apps. She's been named a Forbes Next 1,000 entrepreneur, and she's been recognized by Mass Challenge as the founder of a high impact startup. Welcome, Amy Van Haren.
Thanks so much, Lila. Really wonderful to be here. It's fun to see all the answers coming in, and that will definitely help guide our conversation today. And so I am going to get us started with all the wonderful things that we are here to talk about. I am convinced that this is going to be an engaging conversation, and we're really excited for your participation. As Lila mentioned, I am the founder of Pump Spotting, and we are a community-based baby feeding support solution. And we help companies to become breastfeeding friendly organizations, and we help working parents navigate the day-to-day of nursing and pumping by surrounding them with community and safe spaces and all the things they need. And one of the things that gets me most excited is that we have served over 45,000 parents to date. And so I have learned a lot from parents about what this journey looks like and what working parents need. And it's really the community is the foundation of who we are. So I'm really excited to share some of those insights with all of you today. And as Lila so beautifully mentioned, I think we're all aligned about why we're here to really understand the state of isolation and what's going on with caregivers and working parents, to gain ideas and insights that really help you with all these opportunities and challenges that we see popping up. And one of the things I personally hope that you take away from this is the value of community and how important it is. I am not here to do this all alone. We have an amazing panel, and I would love for each of them to take a moment to introduce themselves. And we're going to start off by everyone giving one golden nugget, one takeaway right off the bat. So Avril, welcome. Will you start us off?
Sure. Hello. My name is Avril Rookwood. I'm the founder of the Corporate Doula. On the individual side, I provide full spectrum doula services, so fertility, postpartum, and pregnancy doula. On the employer side or organizational side, I help create strategies, policies, and practices for employers and organizations that want to make places better for parents. And what I hope you walk away from this conversation is that parents really want to show up and do their best and fulfill personal goals of theirs and be rock stars at work. They just need the infrastructure to help that happen for them.
Faith?
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Faith Saunders, or you may hear Faith McCalla. It's the same person. My name of my company is Discover a New Future. And what we do at Discover a New Future is we provide professional development as well as leadership training to help organizations to help their employees to be the best, best contribution, provide their best contribution to their organizations. What I'd love for people to take away from today is that it's very important, especially today, to pay attention to the human side of work. That's very important as we go through this pandemic and beyond. Thank you.
And Dr. Jackson, welcome.
Thank you, Amy. Hello to all of you. I am Dr. Jessica Jackson, and I am a licensed psychologist. I have a private practice that is based in Houston, Texas. And one of the things that I would like for people to take away today is really understanding how we are impacted. I think often we use words like isolation and stress, even burnout. And so we know what those words are defined as, but we don't always know, well, what does burnout mean for mental health? What does stress mean for mental health? And so I'm hoping as we jump into this discussion today that you all will take away like, oh, now I understand how my employees or even myself is impacted when these concepts are in play. So looking forward to the conversation.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to end the poll right now so we can see what it looks like. Thank you so much to so many people for participating. Sounds like there's a lot of alignment around many things: turnover, attracting top talent, engaging employees, and all of the above. And I think that is very consistent with what's happening in many places. I know we've all seen so many of the headlines around what's happening with our workforce right now. And I know that you're here because you're likely experiencing it personally, not only as a company, maybe feeling the reverberations daily, but even maybe personally in your own life, day to day with what you're struggling. So it's really true that caregivers across the country right now are experiencing unprecedented levels of stress. 81% say their ability to engage at work has been negatively impacted. 2/3 are struggling with mental health. There's 2 million more mothers than usual experiencing burnout. All these words Dr. Jackson is speaking to, they're coming up again and again with this population, which is leading to so many women and caregivers choosing to leave the workforce. And so we're really glad you're here. These thoughts and feelings and questions and things on your mind, you are not alone, and neither are your working parents, though many of them feel like they are right now. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. And so to just set the tone, I really want to hit on a few key themes about what we're hearing from working parents and what things look like. And a lot of what I pulled are quotes that come directly from some of the working parent sessions we've hosted and many of the parents we've spoken to across the country. And I think one of the things that everyone is feeling is that parents and caregivers and workers are always on right now. There is a real amplified tension between being a caregiver and a worker, and that balance has really been stretched. People are navigating external stressors and constant day-to-day shifts, sometimes in a week, sometimes hour to hour, sometimes day to day. One parent we spoke to likened it to holding a deck of cards that continue to be reshuffled again and again and again. So with caregiving and all the responsibility and COVID and in and out and decisions, it can go from it's working and we're fine to total crisis with one moment and one shuffle of those cards. Another way to put that is that parents are currently playing a parent version of Wordle, where every day looks different and you keep getting another chance to try and do it differently. Caregivers are also spending over 8 hours a day on caregiving, and that's the same amount we spend on jobs. So when you add that up, that's the equivalent of 2 full-time jobs, and they're feeling unseen in their work and even in their house. They're worried about not being seen and how that will affect advancing their careers as they want to move forward and feel professional. And parents are worried that they're not good enough. And that really strikes home. And I think all of that is being exacerbated by this shift to remote and hybrid work. In so many ways, it's amplifying some of that invisibility, and it makes it much harder to connect, to create empathetic connections, and to feel a real sense of belonging. In fact, almost half of employees are feeling disconnected from their organization, as well as people within their organization. And this really speaks to what Avergil mentioned just a minute ago, is that one of the most important takeaways from people we talk to is that they want to thrive. They want to do a great job as your people, as your employees. They want to feel like wonderful parents. They just need us to listen and to take action to really help make that come to life. And so really the crux of why we're here is that, yes, there's so much going on and we're in a state of crisis, but we're also in a state of real opportunity. And I love this from a McKinsey study, that if we understand what's going on and we take moves for meaningful action, the great attrition could really become the great attraction. As we've seen firsthand, I think all of us, that when you make a parent feel seen and valued and able to show up as they are in all their toddler crawling on them, milk stains on their shirt, no daycare, no sleep realities, that they will be much more committed to their work. They will stay on the job and they will tell all their friends that they're in an environment that supports them as a person. So let's talk about what's going on and how we can really start to make waves. So one thing I want to note is that this isn't just a few employees who are feeling lonely and isolated. It's really almost epidemic levels, that 97 million workers say that they are lonely. And that has a tremendous impact on our bottom lines, because lonely employees say that they are less productive. They miss work 2 to 5 times more for stress and illness, and they sometimes think about quitting twice as much. So Faith, talk to us. What is contributing to these levels of extreme loneliness, and why is it more than ever? And what's happening among caregivers right now that we should be thinking about?
Interesting. These are really staggering numbers, Amy, and thanks for sharing it. Another interesting fact to add to this is that in our lifetime, we spent 90,000 hours at work. That's a lot of time, right? And pre-COVID, what happened was that many of us were in space with each other, and those interactions, those relationships were had an opportunity to really thrive then, the water cooler conversation, etc. But with what has happened due to the pandemic, that has changed significantly, as many people are working virtually, as well as some in hybrid situations and some back in space. But a large majority, are the infrastructure of the work, the way that the work was structured initially has changed. And so with that, there is isolation. We're connecting virtually, but that's totally different from when we're in person, be able to actually socialize with individuals. So some of the things that are causing this are that people are feeling that they don't have that meaningful relationship or connection that they usually have in the past. Also, there is a poor work-life balance, in a sense. When you're working virtually, or even in a hybrid situation, what happens is that everything is melded together. You don't know when your day starts when you're at work versus when you're actually with your family. So it's very difficult to discern between both of those. Also, what I'm hearing also, that there's a lack of support from managers and leaders in organizations. In fact, there are studies that actually supports that, because the way that we usually go about our daily interactions, etc., at work, or business, it cannot be the same way now that we're in this type of work environment. Some people are complaining about the lack of not only connection, but there is poor working relationship with individuals now, because in the virtual world, and feeling restricted regarding to doing their work. We know we have to be more flexible as managers in terms of how we are actually supporting our staff. Individuals need more autonomy to be able to do their work, and to be able to fulfill what they're supposed to be doing. I really want to really highlight, in terms of the caregivers, to go back about being able to create that structure whereby individuals know when work begins and ends, and so that they can actually create that work-life balance. And last but not least, I'd like to what I've also heard is that there's fear and concern about contracting the virus and bringing back to family, and being at home and not having the support that sometimes that you have had in the past, because maybe a grandmother or some other family member would be there to help, but because of the situations that we're in, some of those supports that we had in the past are no longer in existence. So those are some of the things that are contributing to the loneliness that people are actually experiencing.
And that's a lot of things. I think that's a lot going on all at once that has an impact. And so, Dr. Jackson, when you think about the weight of all of that, the not being able to shift between work and home and feeling so disconnected from our community and not having guidelines and boundaries, it's not just isolation, but this has physical and emotional and behavioral health implications on what, where employees are and how they're feeling. So talk to us a little bit about, what you're seeing happening and what are things that we should be thinking about when we consider the health of our employees and people right now.
Absolutely, Amy. I think one of the things I've seen a shift, right? In the beginning, to be expected, we saw increase in symptoms of anxiety, increase in symptoms of depression. People were feeling stressed out. There was a lot of fear. And so as the pandemic has continued, we've also seen another layer. People feeling bad about feeling anxious or afraid or experiencing depression. And that makes it a lot worse, right? And I think that people forget about that piece. In the beginning, it almost felt acceptable. When people are like, I'm really stressed out about this. I am feeling like I'm at my capacity is acceptable. And now there seems to be this shift that's almost this unspoken shift that is saying, okay, no, you should be over it by now. You should have fixed it by now. And the question I always ask clients that I work with, I'll say, says who, right? There's a lot of unspoken rules. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And this is happening for parents and it's contributing to the isolation. If you are coming in the workplace and everybody is saying they're doing well, it doesn't feel good to say, well, I'm not doing well. And so then we also start to doubt ourselves and beat ourselves up. Well, why am I not doing well? What could I be doing better? Why is this not working for me? I think even, I'll push it a little bit. It's a little bit of we are over relying on the word resilience. By definition, resilience means to recover from something quickly. I'm not sure how you recover quickly when it's ongoing, right? And a lot of people have been using that word. They have said, if you're resilient, how to build resilience. And I'm like, well, you're building it while it's still happening. That's a tall order for a human. And I think helping people to borrow a little bit from self-compassion. And we talk about acceptance and commitment therapy sometimes, like how do we help people to feel like they are accepting that they are having all of these emotions and recognizing I have to move forward versus I have to say that I'm okay. And I'm seeing that is actually increasing stress now because constantly I'll have people who are saying, why am I still feeling stressed? How come I'm still feeling so anxious? Because it's an anxiety provoking situation, right? You are human and trying to figure out how do I feed my children? How do I perform at work? How do I caregive? How do I, maybe your children are back at school, maybe they're not, these constant things. I'm like, you have never experienced something like this in your life. The idea that you are recovering quickly and having all of this resilience, I think adds a little too much pressure. And I'm seeing that increasingly with parents I work with and just individuals in general.
Yeah, I think that's I do think this has gone on so long. We get to this point where it feels harder and harder to justify that we still feel this way. And also what I'm hearing you say is also creating spaces where we can talk about feeling that way and feel that it's okay to bring that up and make that happen. And even sometimes I know what a difference for as an employer or a manager just to check in. Say, how are you today? That's such a small thing, but I feel like somewhat we've gotten to a place where less and less of that is happening and it maybe needs to be happening even more. So Avril, with you working so closely with parents day in and day out, you're really hearing from them and you're really, seeing both sides of what's going on. Talk to us about what you're hearing from the parents you work with about what do they need most from their employers right now? What are they missing? What are they looking for? Give us some insights.
I look at it like a sandwich. So one side of the bread is transparency. The other side of the bread is transition, and the meat in the middle is communication. So transparency, whether we're talking someone who is going to be transitioning out of work to take leave to have a child or is trying to conceive and don't know how, a lot of what employers have is some great stuff, but nobody knows how to get to it. Nobody told me that this was available. I was over here, burning the midnight oil, trying to figure something out that maybe one email, one phone call could have solved for me and not created all the anxiety around that planning, family planning or family sustaining that I was so worried about. While people are gone or when they're come back and they're working, community is that middle piece. Who you left as is not the same person you are when you come back. Life has changed, you have changed, circumstances have changed. And I didn't care to talk about the things that I cared about talking about at the water cooler before is not what I care about today. So who are those people now? Where are my new people? So finding that community, whether it's while you're out or back at work, is a task. And maybe not even encouraged, right? So we got to get to creating those spaces. And where I think employers are losing parents is that transition back to work. So whether it's strictly from needing to tidy up things from a leave of absence point of view, or it's no one's leaving the light on for you. No one's ushering you back in. And how does this work? And do you have to come back full force immediately? Can you trickle your way in? What are the new things that concern me? So if you're a lactating person, you've got to take out time several times during the day. How does that happen? What are the particulars of that? Because that wasn't my life before. So it's the struggle with those areas is causing a lot of stress. And I would have to say there is not one postpartum parent and now really their partner that I don't have a perinatal specialized therapist on speed dial for them. It takes work to matriculate back into that life, to get used to your new work. And if your employer doesn't have those things blaring in your face, sometimes it's too hard to search for it.
And before we move forward, Dr. Jackson, I wonder if you wanted to just add on to that a little bit, because Avril, I think you're so right about the work and the state of things. So, as employers, how do we consider these transition times and what's going on and with the mental health? And, what are you hearing and what are you thinking that employers can do as it pertains to really communicating and connecting and being transparent, as Avril said?
Right. I think Avril had some really great points highlighting connection. And I wanted to tie that back into what I was saying about those feelings of like, I'm the only one not able to move on and thinking about isolation. And so I think sometimes what I'm hearing is employers are concerned. I don't want to give employees a space to vent or to just get stuck in how we're feeling. And I encourage people to think about a balance. On the other side, if you are human, you have connected with someone at some point where you commiserate and you both are like, whew, this is tough, right? As a parent, I mean, think about big projects you've had at work. You all have tackled them, but there's a part of it, it's almost laughter. Like, I can't believe we are getting this done. And look how ridiculous this is. That sense of connection where you feel like you are not the only one, I think is extremely helpful. And so I wanted to highlight that because people feel isolated when you believe you're the only one. And there's a phrase that's been used a lot in the media, toxic positivity. And I encourage employers to think about how can we give people a space, even if it's only like a water cooler moment, as Avril mentioned, like a 15-minute, because sometimes, most times with limited time, those conversations can turn into, this is how I'm coping, or just a moment of levity. I'm not the only parent who has a child behind me who's screaming and yelling and laughing about the fact that everybody in their background has screaming and yelling right now. That helps us to feel better, even though the situation has not changed. And so I just encourage people to reframe how we're thinking about support, so to reduce isolation.
I think your point is such a good one, that sometimes it doesn't have to be a massive initiative. It's sometimes small things. And it's honestly, we always say at Pump Spotting to parents, don't quit on your hardest day. because sometimes when you're really in the thick of it, you just need a kind word or a moment of connection, and it changes everything for you to keep going, and you do feel better the next day. And so I think even as employers, sometimes we think, what is the benefit we have to have, or the big solution, or the, you know, the golden ticket that solves anything. And some of it is thinking small about the ways that we connect and how that makes a difference. And one of the things I thought that we could ask everybody about for a minute is, why do you think people are leaving? I'm going to pop up this next poll, I think. Okay, can everybody see our next poll around the number one reason you think employees are leaving companies today? Just weigh in, put it out there, talk about what you're seeing, because I think there's many things that contribute, but there's some interesting studies coming out and some interesting conversation about what's really going on and why parents and caregivers and everyone is really making a decision to make a different choice when it comes to work. So just give everybody a minute to put your answers in. This is amazing. Thanks to everyone for the participation. Okay, I'm gonna give everyone 10 seconds to put your final answer in. Okay, so here's what we've got. We've got 52% work-life balance, 24% being unseen, 14% compensation. These are all really good answers, and they all definitely contribute to why people make the decision to find a new career. But one of the studies that came out from McKinsey in September shared that while of course flexibility and compensation and all these things matter, the top three reasons why people leave is that they do not feel valued by their organizations, they do not feel valued by their managers, and they lack a sense of belonging at work that I think comes from this connection and shared identity. And so Dr. Jackson, do you mind expand a little bit more on what you were just speaking about in terms of connections, and what are the actions we can take so that we're fostering community and being, having employers and managers see their people externally and outwardly at this time period?
Absolutely. When we think about a sense of belonging, a sense of connection, anyone who is taking kind of like a psychology 101 class, you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. On that triangle, that hierarchy of needs, it's like we need food, right? We need shelter. You know what is actually also on the hierarchy of needs? A feeling of belonging. That is actually, so I remind people of that because I'm saying we have an innate need to feel connected to other people. And so when we are experiencing something like what we've experienced over the past 2 years, where we have less of that connection, that is a great opportunity for employers to get innovative. How do I help employees feel connected, feeling like they belong, right? And I think about belonging as feeling like you're at home, right? Everyone, you don't always have a language for it. I can't say, oh, I always, I don't walk around personally saying, I belong here. But you can feel it. When you walk in a room and you're like, these are my people. This is where I belong. And so I encourage people to think about how can we get innovative with that on something like Zoom. And like you mentioned, Amy, it doesn't have to be large initiatives. It is, do we encourage our employees to get together? Maybe we give out gift cards for coffee once a month or something like that, and people can connect on that. Or we encourage something like, hey, maybe instead of everyone showing your face on Zoom, maybe, especially I think about for women who are breastfeeding, is there a group where you can breastfeed at the same time and not be on camera and people can opt in? So it's for people who feel comfortable being able to talk to each other and just have audio only, right? Thinking about how do I feel like I am not completely alone in this, because it literally is a need that your body and brain needs to function. And when we ignore that part, then we see how the rest of it gets affected. And we see that we start to have not only increased stress, but our mood changes, right? There's a reason that isolation is a risk factor for depression. When people are feeling depressed, they isolate more, and it's a cycle. And so I encourage people to think about maybe we're getting really creative in compensation. Maybe we're getting really creative in career growth, but how are we helping people to feel connected in a way that maybe we just sit around and we work listening to music? I don't even have to talk to you, but now I'm not in a room by myself at home. So really getting creative in that.
And so much of that faith is also about being human. I want to go back to something you said in the beginning, because I do think part of that connection and belonging is being seen as human. We don't leave our human selves behind when we come to work. And so talk to us about how can we as companies and employers and managers think about paying attention to the human side of work? What can we do that way?
Well, I think it's very important especially now, for managers to have that one-on-one with their employees, to be really listen to just hear what they're actually going through, because you can't do something that you don't know. So the more you have information, more support you can actually provide to your employees. I think it was also mentioned earlier, that water cooler conversation. It doesn't, where many of us are working virtually, and that can happen even during the virtual world. Be giving your employees that time to have that water cooler huddle virtually. That could be having individuals go into little breakout rooms, 2 people in each virtual room, and just talking about what's happening in their lives. Even better, if you know that, if based on the information garnered from your one-on-one, you realize that their parents, they're individuals who may have the same age group of children, or maybe new mom, be able to connect those individuals together, so that they can talk about really what's happening in their lives and get support from someone who truly understands what's happening, and possibly come up with some solutions for themselves. Or even just having that dialogue can be so helpful, even if there's no actual solution for your situation. I think also what's very important is for managers to model certain behaviors. So often, and I've seen it and I've heard it so often, where managers are sending out texts and emails at various times after work, right? And with the expectation, sometimes they're saying, well, I don't expect the person to respond. But of course, we're in this time and age when, as soon as we hear that ting, we have to look, right? We're just conditioned to be able to look at what it is, and we have this tendency of wanting to respond. So use in most apps, you have that where you can actually delay when it actually goes out. So if you write a message or an email, you delay it so that it goes out 8 o'clock on Monday morning, not on Saturday or Sunday. So utilizing some of these tools that we have in order to provide that support. Share resources, I think, is very important. Sharing resources among your team, your employees, so that they know of what other resources, what other things are in existence, or encourage that among your team, so that individual can share that type of information with each other, so that they can feel more supported. One other thing I'm thinking about as it pertaining to the hybrid work environment, and to prevent that loneliness and create that connectivity or feeling of connection, is when you're having meetings. Even if you have a hybrid meeting where you have some people are in the office, some people are logging in from home, have everyone on their computers when you're having a meeting. Because for those people who are at home, it feels isolating to see everyone sitting in a room, and you're alone at home on your computers. So it's just some little subtle things that we can actually do to encourage that connection, and helping people to feel a part of, and feel that they belong. And again, it's not work as usual. We just can't just jump in and say, well, we're going to start work. We need to really talk about that human side of things. Thank you.
Yeah, even sometimes on our team, we try and never have meetings after 3 or 4 o'clock, because that's when parents pick up kids off the bus.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a small thing to say, you know what, rather than you stressing, trying to be here or there, let's just say for this time period, no problem. Go greet those kids, get a hug, come
Mm-hmm.
back, be part of it. And so thinking human is just how do we do it in our lives, and how can we implement that in such a way? And speaking of hugs, we have someone that's a pump spotting customer. Her name is Adria Horn, and she's amazing. She's the VP of Workforce at Tilson Technology, and she wrote an amazing article recently. What she said about this is that what parents need is a professional and psychologically safe working environment, which I believe is the equivalent of a long, strong hug. So Avril, what is it that companies can do? How do we create a culture where parents feel that they can be themselves, they can be authentic and true to what's really going on or what they're struggling with or what they need? How do we create a space for them to feel safe so that they can be more productive and present all around?
Man, we've really hit it on the head in talking about being human and belonging. What we do is give permission, right? Like, I will give you a little bit more grace if you've given me some permission. So you don't have to have the big expensive, $800,000 program just yet. I'll wait. But you've shown me some grace. You've made space for my humanity at work. And to be quite honest, just take a magnifying glass to the benefits that you already have. Because you're probably not communicating them effectively to your employees. I have to put my manager's hat back on, my benefits manager's hat back on. We are in the space of human resources, human being the operative word here, right? And we very much look at it as a business, but humans are behind. It's human capital that we're managing. And someone wrote something in the chat to say, in terms of belonging, if people leave because of belonging, why do they think they're going to find belonging somewhere else? Well, they're going to keep hopping until they find it. That level of loyalty is no longer there because you weren't trying to help me when I really needed it, the resources. And so I've got to go now. And I'm going to keep going until I find that space. I'm going to look for the lid to my pot. So what employers can really do, first, you really magnify what you already have because you're not utilizing it the way that it should be. You're not communicating it the way that it should be. Start there. And then you create space and then you empower people. Most employees are parents. That's just what it is. And even if you talk to people who are not currently raising children, how many times has an older parent said to a younger parent, like even just making a list at Babies R Us or something, a registry, like, wow, bottles look like this now? We didn't have this gadget, this do. So they have the same stories to say, when my child was 7, when my child was 1 month old, when I transitioned back to work, this is what I wish was available to me, and this is why. That information is useful. Support your ERGs. I can't say it enough. I can't say it enough. Those are the people that have already raised their hand and shown that they're committed to women at work, parents at work, whatever myriad of groups it is that support parents, right? Have them sit at the table with you as you don't sit in a silo and create this plan that in reality no one wants. So work with the people who have made a commitment to work with you, because that really is going to help inform intelligently what you create.
I love one of the things you said about holding space. I feel like that's so important and that's not done enough. And I think that there are certain subpopulations of caregivers and employees within our companies that are really struggling right now. And in particular, women of color and mothers of color are really struggling right now in this labor market and inside companies. And so Dr. Jackson, talk to us about who's most at risk of turnover and really being affected, and how can we ensure that we're thinking about solutions that really solve for every different person, every stage, and especially for our most vulnerable caregivers and parents?
I like to first think about when we use diversity, I want to be mindful also that diversity is going to look different depending on your company. I think sometimes we use this catch-all, and the thing that I challenge people is when you're making decisions, who is not in the room? that's probably who is the minority and the minority group at your company. That is who's going to be most vulnerable. And that can look different. So in many places, it will be women of color. In many places, it will be women in general. There will be, in some places, it will be dads, right? Because not every place has a father who's working. So I do encourage people to rethink how you're thinking diversity, because sometimes we use it as a catch-all. And so I'm like, well, if everyone in the room is looking the same, who are you not considering? And that's who you really need to be thinking about as your vulnerable population, right? And so I think when we start thinking about that, then we get into terms like intersectionality, which is just the understanding of how our different social identities come together to make a situation worse, right? So in many cases, a lot of what we've seen in the media, it's not just that I am a Black person, it's that I'm a Black woman who's a mom, right? These three different things. So my experience would be different if I was not a mom. My experience may be different if I'm not a woman. But when they all come together, they create these perfect storms. When we start thinking about different social identities and who is vulnerable, you add in something like social economic status. Who are the people in my company who are making the least amount of money? Because they're going to be most impacted by things like childcare and trying to find childcare. So really thinking through, it's not just that we have the siloed identity. How are all of these different things coming through to impact? And then when I'm thinking through a solution, how can this help for many people, right? I encourage people to think about a quick exercise you can do for yourself even. When you're sitting in a room, most of the time, whether it's your bedroom, any room, I ask people, I'll say, how many people walked through the door today, right? Most people will raise their hand. And then I'll say something like, did anybody consider if that door was wide enough for a wheelchair to get through? And they're like, no, right? Because that reminds you of how many different factors you're not even thinking about on a daily basis that can impact somebody else, right? Because somebody with a wheelchair is constantly thinking about, how can I get in? Like, I can't even get access to the room. And here I am, I didn't even consider it. So when I'm looking for solutions, it's like, that's why I use the phrase, who is not in the room? What could prevent someone from being a part of what I'm thinking about, right? And so, and thinking about when we look at the media, I think it was the Kapoor Center put out a report last week that was saying about 72% of people of color are considering leaving their job, right? I think that's an important thing to note, because what are those factors that are influencing that? And I don't know that they broke down all of the statistics, but thinking about, is it where they're living? Is it this added stress of what's happening in the world? Is it a socioeconomic status issue, right? Like, not having childcare is already tough enough. But if I'm only making $15 an hour, I can't compete with the people who can afford the available childcare, right? That's going to make it even more difficult. So I want to leave the impression with people where I don't know that I have all of the solutions. I don't know that anybody does. But when you start critically thinking like that, it actually opens up a box and allows you to think even bigger about how you can help your employees, because it helps us to see a much bigger picture and recognize there's not going to be a one solution fits all, but how can I have branches or levels to my solution so that I am helping majority of the employees that need it.
I love that line of thinking. And I think for me, that really resonates because we are in the breastfeeding space. And that is a population that also is not at the table many times, where it's something when it's not seen or it's not, thought about, it's harder to wrap your head around. Well, what does it look like to log a pump to work, or to have to leave my work and my family every 2 hours? And how do I incorporate that into things? It's another space where it's hard to think about what this means. And it has huge implications. It's something where people are already lonely by nature of what you're stuck under a baby, you're under a pump, you're removing yourself all the time from things. And then you add work and the loneliness of everything that's going on. And it becomes, to your point, Dr. Jackson, layer upon layer of what the stressors and things that are taking place. So even from just my perspective and what we really see, that community matters so much. And the other thing is, we as employers, to be brave enough to invite the conversation to be happening. It's okay to talk about it. It's good to talk about it, because that's how we're going to find the solution. And so invite the conversation around it. All right, I'm just going to take a quick time check. We've got 15 minutes, and I know that there are lots of questions and lots of things moving on. So I'm going to move us quickly towards this. I'm going to do one more poll for us, and then I'm just going to have us speak to one more thing, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A so we can talk about solutions and hear from all of you. But the poll we want now is a quick check-in to find out if you were to rate your own company, whether you work for the company or you lead the company or what have you, take a minute and just do kind of an internal check-in. How many stars would you give your company right now in terms of how well they are serving your working parents and vulnerable populations as a whole? And as you're doing that, I'll keep doing that, keep checking in on where you're going. And while you're giving ratings to your company, which are anonymous, we're just getting a sense of how we're all thinking about this. Average, you'll just take a moment before we start to really break down some more ideas and solutions. There's a humongous bottom line business impact to thinking about removing barriers around isolation and fostering connection and being very mindful about the specific needs of working parents. And so why does this matter from a business perspective beyond the health of our people, which of course we care about? Why should every one of us care about really taking time to try and solve this problem?
Exactly what you said. Beyond, if you're just gonna think of it in hardcore business, beyond the health of someone, or the healthier someone is, also the more money that you stand to make as a company. Not just in hard costs, soft costs, mitigation of cost. It's a lot of money that you stand to save, and reputation is worth a lot in this world right now, right? So if you don't have a reputation for being parent friendly, your attraction is going to diminish, which means the pool that you can select from is not going to be top tier, which means that the work that you produce, whatever that cog is, right, is probably not going to be as outstanding as it could have been. The diversity, the life experience, the lived experience that's going to come to the table with more people being willing to work at your company is going to diminish. And that therefore, whatever you produce, whatever your product or service is going to be less of a solution for the world at large. So it really makes a difference, even in health, for example, in the world of having lactation consultants or physical therapy, pelvic floor physical therapists or mental health therapists, that access, people want to know that before they take the job. So give me all of your benefits, give me all of your programs, and I will sit that on the table side by side with whomever else is interested in me before I make my decision. You don't want to be on the short end of that stick.
So let's look, here's our poll about how we're doing. So it looks like we have a fairly mixed population. It's great to see a significant number of good and some excellent and some average. So we're not alone, whichever category you fall into. I think all of us are navigating this and moving through this. And I want to open us up to answer questions and talk about some examples, but I wanted to point out one thing before we do that, and that sort of relates to what best in class might look like or what we're seeing. And so Maven and Great Places to Work did a survey, and they spoke to over 500,000 employees in almost 2,000 companies. So the results from this come from a pretty wide spectrum. And really, as part of it, they deemed that what makes someone best in class is benefits that are seen as special and unique to the needs of their population, including parents, that they created cultures where parents felt that they could be themselves. They fostered psychologically safe environments. Their executive modeled empathy for people, and everyone in the organization, regardless of role, was made to feel like a full contributor in the company's success. And so I think that really relates to everything that we've spoken of, but it's a good snapshot of how all the different ways to think about this. And so I am going to move us over to the question and answer. So we're going to try and do 10 minutes of question and answer, and then I'll give us one final thought. And then we've got a first question coming up here from Nicole. Thank you, Nicole, at Behavior Analyst of West Michigan. Her question is, with new parents, how can we make it attractive to come back to work after paternity leave? We know that we need to reduce stress and remove barriers, but what exactly should we do or put in place? Average, or anyone want to take that?
There's no silver bullet. what you have to do is ask the folks who came back, did they think that that was a great experience, a fabulous experience, or a terrible experience? And use that as your springboard for what the next action is the short answer.
Yeah. I'd like to just to add to what Abigail Jill said, that doing that one-on-one with that individual to find out what their needs are. As was mentioned, the person who's coming back is totally different from the person who had left. So being able to connect with that person and find out what their needs are at this time, I think is very important.
Yeah.
I would also
Wonderful.
just add,
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was saying, I would also just add to take some pressure off of the employers who are putting in the solution and the employees saying you need to determine your solution. I think also just acknowledging even the words that we use, there's a difference between comfortable and safe, right? So if I say I'm trying to make a place a safe place, there's a much higher threshold I need to meet versus comfortable. Anybody who is coming back from maternity or paternity leave, they do not want to leave their child. That's just going to be difficult. There is not enough things you can do to say, yes, I want to be back here, right? But if you reframe it as like, what can we do to help make it more comfortable, not what will bring you back, it takes the pressure off of everybody having the perfect solution and acknowledges it's going to be tough. We just want to help ease that a little bit versus we're going to solve it. And I think that helps everyone to feel more collaborative.
I love that. It's really powerful to think about. Okay, Madison at DraftKings, thank you so much. She asks, how can we engage our work from home parents with their peers? It's something we're working on, would love some recommendations. So how do we keep work from home parents engaged with their peers?
As I mentioned, those water cooler conversations, having people connect, even having some groups, not necessarily during work time, but during work time where people can actually connect with each other and talk about having those conversations that they need for support. I think that is very, very important.
I would also say invest in your managers. Because managers do what they do, whatever they're been hired to manage. They're not always great people. And so even giving them some tips, clues, and resources on how to bring together a new type of resource. Someone could have been a manager for 25 years. This is a new day in managing people. So you may need some new skills in order to corral, encourage a hybrid kind of workforce.
I would also encourage us to redefine what engagement means. I think we have a tendency as employers to say, this is what works for majority of people, let's do it. But what engagement may have meant for me prior to having children is different. Maybe before I had the time to meet for happy hour and I wanted to chit chat on a meeting. And now engagement for me means valuing my time a little bit differently. I would like to have shorter meetings. Then I can choose to go to a water cooler because we didn't spend 20 minutes of the meeting saying, hey, let's catch up for every meeting, right? Because my time looks different. And I think when we treat everybody the same without recognizing like, oh, there's differences, right? I think it's a difference between equality and equity, right? We don't want to give everybody the same and have everyone at the same starting point and say, figure it out. We need to say, what do you need to feel like you can start at the same point? That may be redefining engagement. What does it mean to engage? Maybe engagement for me is connecting in my meetings and not doing water coolers, so I have more time with my children. And I think when we do that, we have a better option for success in that.
Yeah, and I think really identifying, creating spaces where people can self-select who to connect with or how to connect or find the people that they need to speak, to speak with, because every phase of life, every age of child, for example, is very different. And when you're in the very early phases, you need someone at 3 a.m. You need a place that's safe to talk to someone when you're both up in the middle of the night, exhausted, working through it. When your kids are mobile and crawling over everything and you're trying to have a Zoom call and they're chasing them out the room, you need to find parents who understand what it means to be in the active phase of parenthood, or if you're navigating homeschooling. And so that's where ERGs, I think, and virtual communities and places where you are giving your employees access to safe communities to have these real conversations, and they can find who they need or what it is they need in that moment without it having to feel, forced or hard is a really amazing way to say, we see you and we know you need to be connected to other people. And here's some ways we're doing that, not just in the office, but virtually and coming together.
Yeah, help me find my new best friend.
Yeah, because friends, you build new friends as parents and you build new friends at work. And we even had, we spoke to one company that in their lactation room, they had a circular table and all the moms pumped together. And when we saw them, 8 years later, those parents were still the closest within the company because they had something to connect over a time period, and the company fostered that connection, which was really amazing. Okay, Eric from WebMD, I've seen young parents leave our company over the past year, and I myself have a toddler. So I want to know what companies can do to remove those barriers to retain workers.
I think you kind of mentioned something about that earlier, Amy, is have an evolutionary approach to how you support parents. Just having the fertility or just having the baby stuff is not going to sustain you for long. They run out of that stage quicker than you think, and your needs as a parent, change. So having a evolutionary approach to what you're trying to solution for, I think, is the key.
I would also say flexibility. I think one of the things for anyone who's ever left the job or contemplated leaving, one of the things you think about is not just what's happening for you currently, is this sustainable going forward? So you're thinking in the future, like, what if this changes? What if this changes? And so I think what gets lost in that for companies is we're also not thinking about how are we going to be able to change and adapt as the child grows, right? And so I think really being able to say, we're willing to redefine. We all know what it feels like when something is not created for you, and when someone adapts it, you don't want it, right? It's like going into a store, you're buying a pair of jeans, they only sell it to a size 6, but they're like, you can get it tailored. I don't want this as much anymore. I want the size that fits me because that's what I'm going to buy. And so when companies are thinking about initiatives, are you adapting something you currently have or tailoring it, or are you integrating it to what's happening and making it from the core for everyone? Because people are going to stay when they feel like something is made for them, and not when they have to make modifications and adaptations to be able to help them to feel included.
I totally agree. And I think it's a continuous process. I think that is the key piece. It's not just a one-shot thing. It's a continuous evaluation of the situations that our people are facing, especially in this time and age, and adapting to that.
Okay, we have 3 minutes, so I'm going to do one question, and I'll let maybe one of you speak to this one, and then we'll just wrap it up. So from Natalie, a work parent, she said, I've definitely experienced feelings where I'm comfortable telling my manager when I'm feeling overwhelmed, but they think that's temporary. How can I shift the conversation to explain that anxiety is ongoing? And also, how can managers be encouraged to offer better support for direct reports? I've been struggling because I want to be transparent, but it's hard to ask for what I need. And is it my responsibility if I'm being transparent about my anxiety and loneliness? It's a really good question, Natalie.
I think I'm happy to take it unless Avril or Faith, do you have anything that you? I think when we think about things like anxiety and stress, at the core, you need a mental health professional, right? When we think about strategizing for so many other things, we will hire consultants. We will hire strategists when we're figuring out a plan. And so when you're also thinking about even return to office, right? A lot of people had a health consultant, rightfully so, but they did not consult a mental health person. And you're leaving out an aspect. It's not just that people are concerned about the virus, their mental health is affected. And so I would encourage people, when you're wanting to have those conversations, to bring in a professional, have a consultant, offer a workshop to define things like anxiety, stress, and burnout, so everybody can be on the same page about what it looks like for coping. It can be really hard to advocate for yourself if you're not quite sure about what it all means or what to go forward. And I think a way to advocate is to ask to bring in someone who can help everyone in the company level set on mental health challenges.
I just have to add, and to address the stigma.
Yeah.
That's why she feels weird about approaching her manager about that.
Yeah. safe spaces for these conversations. We could talk all day. You are all amazing and wonderful. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you to this beautiful panelist group for bringing their insights. A couple quick things before we go. We are going to follow up tomorrow with a PDF that has these insights and quotes and links to the articles we talked about. If you have more questions, you can pass them on. I'm going to share our information right here so that you can get in contact with everyone. And before I do that, one thing, I just love this quote: the best thing employers can do for their business right now is to stop thinking of the great attrition as a business problem and instead simply address it as a human problem. Thank you so much, Dr. Jackson and Avril and Faith. Thank you to everyone who came. We will send you the recording. Keep the conversation going. And thanks so much.